Just so everyone knows, Sid, who is on the, the technical review part of the project, has to come in with the, at the plan stage. That's what Sid does. He works down in the Gulf of Mexico, and he's got some great experience with that. We've got a team, in Sterling that's what they do, is they do the technical side. So that's why Sid is here, because really he's the technical expert on, offshore floating and fixed bottom. I'm Doug Boren. I'm from the Pacific region, and as I talked about yesterday, looking at offshore floating, BOEM's perspective is probably offshore California and Hawaii are the two most prospective areas for floating wind. The first project's going in. And, in Oregon too, with the wind float project that we're currently processing, we've got the unsolicited funded projects moving forward, or potentially moving forward. And I wanted to caveat this with, I know that Habib may have been playing this up, but bottom line is we're regulators, so I don't know how exciting this is going to be, and ultimately everyone in the room will probably come to not like BOEM, because as regulators we're not going to make everyone happy, and I know that developers and people on the super excited about offshore floating wind, but BOEM's job is to facilitate the development of the resource by making areas available on the OCS. But that doesn't mean that anyone is getting a free ride. And we definitely have the regulations, and where there's lots of talk about making efficiencies and improvements. But ultimately, it's going to run through the process, and and as we gain more experience at this, it's going to be just put in, goes into the BOEM black box and comes out, and there'll be a lot of coordination and back and forth, but bottom line is we are regulators. So with that, we'll turn it over to Sid, and he will go through the first exciting portion.
Just real quick, I wanted to start here. Obviously working for BOEM, we, as you all know, we issue our leases. We ensure that the federal taxpayer gets an equitable return for the uses on the OCS, and that includes renewable energies. And the Energy Policy Act of 2005 also requires us to promulgate necessary regulations to do that. So that's the end result of all of our efforts, at least mine initially. So in order to do that, our preferred methodology is by incorporation of consensus guidelines. So we look to industry groups, trade groups, to develop consensus guidelines. ANSI recognized as consensus guidelines. So we would look to AWEA in this instance, and or ASCE or other recognized engineering or trade groups to do that. And so we try to assist them in any way possible by through our research programs, coordination, and whatnot. But we realize that we're not necessarily at a place where we're ready to reference directly into the CFR existing consensus guidelines because some may be lacking. So we have a near-term view, a medium-term view, and a long-term view towards achieving that. And let's see. So part of our long-term view is to try and coordinate with individuals in this room our Renewable Energy Research Program to answer different questions and to identify challenges. And I just put some thoughts up here on this slide. And the first one was really, it's fairly well established, but our current practice is to use a 50-year mid-ocean condition and a 500-year ultimate safety, ultimate level check for global robustness. And my question is, do we have a consensus guideline that says that this is adequate? And through IEC, I believe we do at the current time. That's correct. But There's for floaters, we require the 500-year robustness check. And so the question I have is, we're only requiring the mooring system in the 500-year robustness check. And my question is, what elements of the mooring system are included in that? Do we go all the way up through the fair leads? Do we, what type of analysis as far as where we're tying into the hull? I mean, I think we have some ambiguities there that still need to be addressed, at least in my mind.
I think there's one kind of elephant in the room. That.
What's that?
In a tension leg platform, I think it's unclear whether the tendons are mooring system or structure. That needs to be sorted, because then we're doing tendons for 500-year.
Right.
So yeah, I think DNV has taken a stance on that in their OSJ 103 and said tendons in a TLP are structure. They're not a station keeping system. It's unclear on the U.S. side where we are on that.
Right. Well, and like,
and it's really important. It will really drive a lot of elements.
and I mentioned our preferred methodology is to include consensus guidelines. Laws was up here a minute ago speaking about different issues of design, and it's unclear whether he's speaking about the IEC document, which is a consensus guideline, or the ABS document, which is not. So I think work needs to be done to clarify some of the requirements for floating designs and structured design and fixed designs, as far as moving towards U.S. accepted guidelines, consensus guidelines.
I spoke mainly about the ABS tag.
Yes.
What does CT say about the tendons?
It says they're made out of steel tubes.
Yeah.
So
They're
not mooring lines.
yeah, they're structure and everything. So anyway, but I don't want to go down a rabbit hole.
Right.
That's one of the things that's kind of
Okay.
Sid, in your the 500 years ULS return period is also something that has been used recently for fix. This is something you also see in the future to be used for floating.
Well, for the mooring systems on floating, it's a 500-year check, yes. The reason the ratio of the 500 years, and I wrote to my understanding, to work in the Gulf of Mexico. Whether the 500-year is the appropriate ULS check to go with the 50-year, it could potentially be site and structure specific, but for right now, the codes default to 550. So it's another area that people could look at in greater detail. We still on moorings? Just some more thoughts about site characterization and design inputs. And geotechnical investigations were mentioned yesterday as potentially we could look at our requirements and better define our requirements, and maybe make our requirements better fit our needs to increase efficiency. And maybe we're spending money in wrong direction and not getting the answers that we need. So geotechnical site investigations, borings, testing, number of tests, alternative methods for getting the information. We lack guidance, consensus guidance that we could incorporate into the Code of Federal Regulations on that.
Sid, I'm sorry, we were just saying, talking about the geotech for the anchor locations, what is your thinking you would require?
By default, harkening back to the oil and gas requirements, there's a specific requirement for if you have a spread mooring pattern, a minimum of 3 borings in 120-degree spread. Design community doesn't necessarily like that, and I don't particularly like that. I don't think it's a deficient use of your money. We would recommend you hire a reputable geotechnical consultant and geophysical consultant and develop a site-specific investigation plan that would include borings and other alternative subsea sampling, testing, CPT readings, whatnot, and marry that with your whole G&G plan. And we would hope once you go and do that you've got adequate coverage. But really, until your G&G is done and you get the results back and analyze it, then you really know whether you've done enough holes. But I know that's not the answer you want, but that's the engineer's answer.
Just with a reputable firm, we can come in and have a conversation about what makes both economic and government safety and regulatory approval sense.
Correct.
Okay.
And you know, you asked the geophysicist to make a judgment call on how homogeneous she thinks the substrate are. And if we have evidence that we're very homogeneous, well, we'll take that into account when we design number penetrations. And if we want to do a soil boring and an adjacent cone penetrometer test, and you correlate the two, then maybe you have an opportunity to take cone penetrometers and do them remotely and make inferences as to where the remote soil strengths are.
Good, thank you.
Just to follow up on that, if the industry were to put that kind of idea into a consensus document, does that help you, or are you pretty much good to go with that type of dialogue in any event?
We feel we're good to go from regulating it internally, and we can have this discussion with every developer as they come around, or a consensus document that's out there that we could point to would maybe remove some ambiguity, uncertainty from the developer standpoint and the designer. So yes, we would favor doing that, and we put out guidelines when we have some on our website, some G&G guidelines that kind of speak to that.
Sorry if I'm interrupting you, but that's actually a good example of where we have different requirements versus both.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, if you have a drag anchor, we don't have the requirement of the Boren, but BOEM has.
And we do, and that's our current state, our current position. But if industry were to come up, convene of experts and explain to us or make a case why it's not needed, we'll evaluate the case, reevaluate the position.
So for example, if we were if you decided to pass it, we wouldn't say anything, but in our report, the BOEM, we would have to say something about it.
And I believe some questions were asked yesterday about the wind resource assessments and the relative uncertainty in that, and especially coupled with you're doing it offshore and our inability to maybe have the precision required to support financing. And it was covered yesterday more eloquently than I can. Please don't read the slide. But just wanted to indicate that we understand the need for verification of our design tools, and we support the continued efforts to do so, whether it be through test tanks, scale modeling, and or in comparison with full-scale data. And so we talked yesterday, I think it was in a sidebar, about the desire to have maybe the holy grail of full-scale data, where you have the people doing the validation have the control of the whole project and the data acquisition from square one all the way through eventual validation. And we see that there's value to that, but we don't want to let the perfect be the enemy of the good enough. If there's available full-scale data out there, we want to support efforts to go get that also, because we want to attack on all fronts. But that's all I want to say. And I do apologize for mischaracterizing the OC3 efforts. This, once again, this is more, I see this more as, I need clarity as to whether we need a fully coupled analysis versus a sequentially coupled analysis on the designs. I need it on fixed structures as well as floaters. And, you know, what I need, in my estimation, there may be some instances where we need both, but, you know, what I really need is some of the people in this room to educate me on the different processes and what my requirements need to be. So I don't know if we have all the answers. The industry has all the answers, and I just don't know them, or if we have to do more research and just codify it. But I will say, we won't beat on people. But you know, and do you need to do both or one or the other to optimize your design? But damping, we haven't, not a whole lot has been said about damping, but during one of our previous reviews, some issues were raised on the handling of damping for the, this was for fixed structures, which probably very much more applicable to the monopiles that this was on than floaters, but the soil damping issues in particular were gone over fairly robustly, and some questions were raised, and not, to my estimation, fully answered. But again, some more areas for potential future research. And pile-soil interaction, we continue to work. We funded several studies to update the current TZ and PY curves, and we continue to look at them, and we're looking at other ways of modeling the pile-soil interaction, whether use of the soil curves is appropriate with certain dynamic analysis, or whether you need to do finite element analysis, and which way is the best way to go about it. So, once again, I think we need consensus development on that. I don't want to sit here and talk forever. We mentioned cables. Cables are, they represent an opportunity to introduce faults in our projects. Our developers don't seem to want our CVAs to look at it. We want our CVAs to look at it. How much and how far they need to look is something that needs to be ironed out. So, you know, it's something for discussion later on in the day. And
can we go back to the cable just real quick?
Yes.
It's such an important issue.
Mhm.
You talk about floating and array cables versus, you know, buying.
Well, for deep water floating
Yeah.
development,
Yeah.
it's been proposed that the
Sure.
inner array,
Sure.
especially maybe a daisy chain
Sure.
configuration, you might,
Right.
instead of going down 2,000 feet, coming
Yeah.
back up.
Yeah.
So it's a great idea. Let's make sure we know what we're doing.
There's some, you know, engineering issues there, because those dynamic cables haven't really been fully designed yet, or commercialized at least. I know there's some, the Japanese have done some, have made some progress on this, right?
Yeah, but again, even in Japan, I mean, as I say, yes, it is 66 kV and 22 kV. So 60 kV is a too short cable, goes short, and then within the small mini array, it's a 22 kV. Those are floating, sort of what they call riser cables. But that's what's for small design. Right now, there's I have got the technical details in my head. I can look it up if people need to know. But there's a new R&D project that started last year, which is again developing floating cables for larger projects.
Right.
But it's
Well, that's the next thing, is when you
It's
get
the next
to,
thing.
when you
It's
get
early,
to
it's-
multiple turbines.
Yeah,
you know,
for multiple
in
turbines.
very deep water, do they have to go all the way to the bottom, or can they be
The
floating in
ba-
the
We've been
water column? And
We've been testing 66 kV cables for 1 year in Fatigue in Southampton.
I mean, the NEDO document last year for the next phase R&D clearly talks about, floating, not deeply buried cables, but floating cables for really deep water installations. But again, it's R&D, it's brand new, and there's Furukawa Electric, Toshiba, and I think it's again, the usual consortia developing that. So it's new. Even ABB doesn't doesn't do that. ABB, because I met with them last year as well, and while they have all the cable technology, they are, at least as per last year, they were not working as much on this whole floating issue.
Have there been any engineering designs where they've done cables floating in the water column? And have there been any assessments of how whale people might react to that kind of
Well,
design?
that is a big part of the Fukushima Forward
Yeah.
pilot project. Because, you know, that's one of the major concerns of the wider, you know, Japanese fishing industry. I mean, let's face it, they're known for their whale hunting and all of the other fishing industry. And the big question that the fishing industry has is, yeah, how does this impact the whole marine life? And you know, while the Kawashima floating spar gave already some answer to that, but that's just one structure. And Fukushima, once phase 2 is completed, it's going to be 4 structures. It will give some insight, but.
But
probably not
these aren't
the last.
public documents? They're, I think we need to have a proactive
They are
response
a number
for
of
these kinds
documents,
of
but they're
questions
all
we
in
can
Japanese
anticipate.
only.
So that's, I mean, and I think as a, you know, not to solve the problem now, but there's a gap that we might want to write down that if we did a small amount of work now, we might be able to avert a 10-year problem trying to mitigate a situation that.
Don't say 10.
Well,
That's how long the problems persist when you don't address them.
I know, I agree.
there's similar structures in oil and gas that are existing now that are documented in public.
Yeah, but I don't know the extent that we have the mid-column, I mean, cable stretched, say it's stretched between 2 structures. It's not prevalent. And if-
No, but we've seen it, or peculiar installations.
I mean, the distance, because of Fukushima, the distance between the structures is quite narrow. So, and I mean, okay, I don't know oil and gas, but I think it's a lot narrower than the oil and gas world.
Very interesting.
Yeah, this is just some of my own personal thoughts on the issues that might be able to help address cost control. It's not really a BOEM mission, but if someone wanted my input, there it is. I think design standardization, which you know, is a BOEM focus, would help the industry in general.
So just to Steve's point, would it be good if the industry tried to come up with a consensus white paper about floating cables?
Sure, and it could drive. You know, it's always better to get out in front of an issue, and it could also drive BOEM's spur us to more research or whatnot. You know.
I think if we can anticipate that this question is eventually going to get asked, and if it'll be a lot better if our response was, yes, we've thought of that, and here's the study we did, rather than, oh yeah, don't worry about it, I saw the whale scratching.
Yeah, I'll bring that video for you. Most of y'all know, we have our technology advancement program, which used to be called the Technology Research Program or something. We renamed it like we were wont to do, rename things from time to time. But all of our reports are available online for download. You can find Lars's old reports there, and Steve's, Walt's, a few others. But so far we've funded 27 studies, 25 of them are complete, when 3 or 4 will be awarded this year again. Some of the recent stuff, we got fatigue study on mooring lines, which is recently completed. We contracted with Red Penguin from the UK on some cable spacing study. Moffett Nickel, we tried to harness their lessons learned from being involved in the ESP on a recent design. And then we've got 4 in the queue here, which should be awarded any day now. And I believe it's Doug's turn. He'll be short.
Just a real question. Are you folks looking at floating substations at all right now?
We are not. Yeah, that is definitely a topic. Yeah. I'll hit it.
There's one in the world, was that right?
Yeah, that's a Japanese one.
Yeah.
Are there any peer-reviewed articles about its operation?
Again, that's the only English language paper that exists that I have a copy of is very, very basic. And that was mostly about how they, before installation, tested, did a lot of tests. I would have to check if there by now some Japanese, there's probably some Japanese report by now on performance because they've had 2 years of operation of the bell. But again, it's going to be Japanese only, so it's not going to be.
But maybe if we're going to have to study this issue because you're going to have to regulate it, maybe it makes sense to hire someone to translate it. Are we talking 500 pages or 5,000 pages?
No. I mean, most of these technical reports in Japan anyway between 50 and 150 pages. Again, the question there is, I mean, Fukushima projects and the related stuff, they do publish a lot, again, because 100% government sponsored, so that a lot of the IP protection stuff doesn't apply. I mean, I can check if there's something available by now on that.
If you think the material is good, but only in Japanese, then maybe we should learn from it and get it translated. If you think the material in it is worth our knowing.
Yeah, I mean, I would have to check with you guys, basically give you the headline saying this is what it covers, and you would have to tell me if that's what you're in detail looking for. I mean, for starters, you're interested, I can email you the English language paper. That's just 2 or 3 pages on how you basically tested the substation in different motion environments to, all of that stuff.
Sure, I'd love to see that.
Thank you.
By virtue of having or being able to go last, it seems like everything I'm going to discuss has already been talked about. The way that we broke it up is that Sid was going to talk about on the technical side, what the challenges are for floating offshore wind, and then I was just going to come in and cover the regulatory and some of the environmental, what we've seen thus far, and of course we've, got to discuss that already. But I did want to say that, from a regulatory, the challenge side is that when the regulations were written, it was for fixed bottom offshore wind. I mean, floating wasn't in the scene at the time, and that's the way the regs are written. So as we discussed earlier, if you go through the geotechnical requirements that we have in our regs, that's for a fixed bottom structure. It's not for a floating structure. So of course, BOEM has the opportunity now to look at it. Do we need to have that same type of geotechnical investigation for floating structures? I don't know, and I think that the way that we're looking at it now is we have to get a lot more information on the geophysical side to know what's out there, and then determine if there's enough there or geotechnical and what's needed as far as installing the floating wind turbines. The other thing that the regulations are untested, and that's on fixed bottom and floating. No project has gone through the regulatory process from start to finish for a floating project. So, we have an unsolicited lease request offshore Oregon for the Principal Power Windfloat Pacific project. We're moving through that. We just got the construction and operation plan for that project. So we're starting our initial review, and, it's moving through the process, but it is untested. And we know that probably as was discussed earlier, as we move through, it may be setting the precedent for other projects that follow because it is the first one. But I do think that there's flexibility in our regs, and I'm fully confident that it will be able to go through the process. It's just a matter of, we're going to have to make decisions along the way as we go. And on the environmental side, some of the challenges, there's lack of environmental data. Classic case is the inner array cables that are floating mid-water column. What is the data out there? I think our plan let's face it, we're going to have to do a NEPA review for the proposal that we have from Principal Power. And, there is probably enough surrogate data out there for some sort of mooring line out in the ocean that we can, but I think too that, it is a demonstration project, and that's probably the best laboratory is to say, well, if we can, minimize our risk and our assessment on this, challenges is deeper water. It's more diverse of a habitat potential as you go out deeper. I can also say that it's a lot more expensive to work in the deeper water too. So, and as we've, I don't want to beat a dead horse on this, but the mooring lines is an issue. Even though we're just starting the NEPA process officially for the Windfloat Pacific project, we've been in coordination with NOAA already. So we know what NOAA's thoughts are on this, and we know what we're going to have to do to address NOAA's thoughts. And, it is going to be, we're responsible for that. We've got to go through that Section 7 consultation, and it's going to happen, and it's going to be a learning process. But we know that it's a concern, valid or not. When someone says, I can see, if you see it on paper and you see 3 catenary mooring lines and you see inter-array cables, and if you look back, it looks like a big spider web, right? And I think NOAA looks at it as like, well, that may be a marine mammal gill net, as they're going through, swimming up the coast. And can we say that there's not going to be an impact? We can't say that there's not. I can say that we expect that it's not going to be an entanglement issue, that it will be a collision issue. So if a marine mammal swims into a mooring line that's floating mid-column, what's the impact of that going to be? Is it going to be take? Is there going to be some sort of mitigation associated with that? We don't know at this time, but we're definitely thinking about it in the Pacific region for sure, because we know that this is on the rise and that this is going to, and like I said, we've been in coordination with NOAA thus far. The other concern is BOEM has done a lot of studies on EMF for the cable to shore that's buried or laid on the surface. But then if you have these inter-array cables, is that just going to be a glowing EMF ball in the middle of the water column? We don't know that, and we haven't studied that. So that may be something that, also if this group can come up with an idea on how to look at that issue, it could be something. But I did want to say that although there are the environmental concerns, there are some, maybe some benefits to floating wind that you don't have in the bottom founded. There's no pile driving impacts. So the proposal that we have now is from Principal Power for the floating is a drag embedment anchor. The TLP may have some pile driving or may use a suction bucket pile. I don't know. There's talk about for potential off Hawaii just to have a big old chunk of cement that you put down on the ground and anchor. So there won't be any pile driving anyway, most likely. So that's a concern that's going to be alleviated during the construction phase. Could be reduced vessel requirements. You're not going to have to bring in the heavy lift vehicles or the heavy lift vessels. If you can, construct it and put it all together at quayside and tow it out, that's less impact out during the construction phase of the project. Floating facilities can be located farther from shore. Good or bad, the farther out you go, probably the more acceptance it is from the people on the shoreline, because that's a concern. It's always visual. I've heard, well, you don't want to put it out too far because it becomes too expensive to get that power to shore. But if you're talking 12 miles offshore or 18 miles offshore, I've heard $6 million a mile for the transmission line to shore. Well, $6 million of a project that's going to cost, in the billions is probably a small drop in the bucket, and it may be worth it to, go from 12 to 18 miles if it's feasible. But it'll definitely reduce the impacts from visual. And also during the decommissioning phase of the project. It's a lot easier to either request to leave in place a drag embedment anchor or to remove the anchors, rather than, most likely, you're not going to have to use explosives or something like that to remove the pilings from a fixed pile, comparing to floating wind.
Doug, do you have a view about decommissioning in place export cables to shore that have no toxins in them, that are, in other words, solid core, that you can just decommission in place?
On the oil and gas side, the platforms off California, most of them are energized with a cable from shore. Because instead of having a diesel generator for air emissions, they just generate, or they get their power from onshore, they run their facility. Is BOEM has let companies leave existing transmission cables onshore. Our regulations say that everything will be removed, but that doesn't mean, at the end of the process, when the decommissioning plan comes in and BOEM approves that, if a company wants to approve to leave that, it's something that BOEM would entertain. And it's hard to say right now for a project that's out there for 30 years, maybe plus. If you can keep getting power out of the wind turbines, what the environmental conditions are going to be. But I don't see right now, just off the top of my head, that there would be any reason not to be able. BOEM is not going to just say, oh no, it's coming out no matter what. So it'll be something that will be evaluated later on down the line, but that it has happened in the past that it's been decommissioned and left in place because there is value to, if you have a hard substrate down there and it starts having organisms act on that and it's no longer energized, that maybe it could leave in place, that the environmental benefit outweighs the detriment for leaving it there.
All the Europeans I've talked to over the last 16 years have said that if you look at offshore facilities, offshore wind facilities, you see a tremendous amount of marine habitat, beneficial marine habitat, and so disturbing that as little as possible at the end of the useful life of the facility is the way to go, assuming that there are no toxins, et cetera.
Right. So, and I can say that, offshore California a little bit different, but the structures that are offshore, that there have been studies that are done that shows that the value of having the structure left out there may be better than the value of removing it completely because it has such a marine ecosystem associated with the structure. So I know they do that in the Gulf of Mexico all the time for the offshore oil and gas platforms.
Doug, did you say that there's sufficient EMF study data on cables to shore, energized cables to shore for?
We think there is. Have we looked at every organism that might cross a cable? No. Have we looked at organisms? Like I said, by virtue of us having energized transmission lines in California, and we have a robust environmental studies program, we have looked at the impacts of that transmission line on the marine environment in Southern California.
Both AC and DC?
Just AC.
Just AC?
Yes. But have we looked at for...
Well, what about on the East Coast? For the Cape Wind review, did you have sufficient data on EMF to...
I can't answer that.
Well, I can say this, that there was sufficient enough to make a decision on that project, and it made it through COP approval. So it was...
Needs to comply.
That's right. So
Right. So I know a lot about this. Nick, just to answer. Cape Wind was sued on a lot of things. We all thought they'd get sued on EMF. They were not. And all the regulators approved all of their cables, and EMF was not flagged as an issue. So that tells me, just speaking as one developer, that EMF is not going to be a deal killer issue.
I would agree with that statement. So this last slide is just Sid and I's contact information. Hopefully we didn't take too long. I know that we're already over from what we were supposed to be. So I hope that doesn't have any impact on the amount of time that we have later to actually get down, which I really feel is probably the most value that BOEM can bring to this is, be included in the conversations that we have here after Habib lets us go and we break out into the sessions.